Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. It's Nikki Jovicic here from LookUpStrata. I'm just here with Alan Short today from FESA and also Tony Johnson from StrataRama. And we're talking today about an incident that happened in Adelaide just earlier this month where three gas cylinders were stored in a unit in Adelaide, and unfortunately one of those gas units exploded and caused a fire within the unit, and a life was lost at that unit as well. And it completely destroyed the unit and also caused a fire in the unit next door. So we just wanted to have a chat with Alan and Tony about the implications to that. And so Tony, we might just start with you. As a strata manager in South Australia, what are the implications of the storage of dangerous goods in strata properties?
Sure, it's scary, obviously, Nikki, isn't it? Because more often than not, we don't know what our neighbour is doing, what our neighbour is storing. And in many instances, they might be tenanted properties as well, which is even harder to police and monitor what's going on. Certainly, there's an absolute risk there for everybody, and it's important, I know we're probably skipping ahead a bit, but it's important to make sure that these properties are well insured, because I know a lot of the questions I get at meetings are always, well, if there's a fire over there, it's not going to travel over here. But the reality is, in this instance, you can see that even in the perfect scenario with all the fire protections in place, I assume, Alan, you can refer to this, an explosion from a gas bottle is going to travel. It's going to spread no matter what you do. And it's about mitigating that risk, both from an insurance perspective, and then prior to that, just trying to mitigate the damages and the risk of it happening in the first place, or how far it's going to travel if it does happen. We won't talk too much again about this specific instance, I guess, just because we don't know the ins and outs of what happened. But just in general terms, that's what we've got to try and mitigate is the risk of the fire happening, then the risk of the fire spreading, and then in the event that all of this does occur still, the insurance thereof.
Okay, and the committee responsibilities are around this? Like, how would the committee would be able to, sorry, Tony, are you there?
Yeah, I think I lost you for a minute.
Okay, that's fine. We can still hear you. I think the video might be freezing a little bit, but that should be fine. So we were just wondering about what the committee responsibilities are around this kind of incident.
We're definitely freezing up a little bit. I think you're asking about I think it's important that committees are taking this seriously and considering it in advance, obviously. So at the next meeting that's coming up, maybe the committee sits down and has a discussion about, what are the current fire protocols at the property? Do we have a plan in place as to where these people are going to evacuate to if something does eventuate? Depending on the type of dwelling, is there an exit strategy in terms of getting out of the building? Are the smoke alarms up to date? What are the depending on when the property was built, does the group need to consider alterations to firewalls and those sorts of things? What is the plan, and is it compliant? When was the last time it was reviewed?
Okay, well that's a good introduction to you, Alan, as well, because that's your kind of area of expertise. So would you like to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma with residential body corporates in terms of their requirements to have an emergency plan in place. So if you're dealing with a commercial property, it's quite clear under the work health and safety legislation that you do need to have an emergency plan in place, and you need to have evacuation diagrams posted around the place, and you need to do trained wardens and do warden drills. But when you come to a residential body corporate, the laws change. So a residential body corporate is actually exempt from a good section of the work health and safety legislation in every state, which means that there's not a direct legislative link for them to be able to provide an emergency plan of what to do in an emergency. But I think there is definitely a duty of care to make sure that you know what's going to do, because lives get saved by knowing what to do. Believe it or not, around about 15% of people will respond like you think they should in an emergency event. The rest of the people will be split between those that will just freeze up and those that will just think it's a false alarm or won't know what to do. And we see it often in office buildings when the alarms go off. Everybody looks to the person next to them and goes, should we do something about it? And they all just sit there and wait. So the training is critical in knowing what to do. So it's not hard. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it can save lives if people know when my smoke alarm goes off, this is what I do.
Okay, so coming back to the committee as well, Tony.
To that end,
you go ahead.
No, sorry, the video's freezing again, but I was just to that end, Alan. I know we've had, clients who've the tenant has gone and checked their fire panel because an alarm's gone off, and they've just turned it off, every day for the last month, waiting for the next fire check, as opposed to actually reporting it and doing something better,
Yeah.
So then coming back to you with regards to the committee responsibilities, Tony, is there anything what is the role of bylaws or education around this kind of issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly always going to be an education. The reality is, you can put anything in a or a bylaw, but if you don't know what somebody's doing, then it was essentially for naught. So this is where it's always going to come back to the education, keeping it on the agenda, keeping it as something that it is checked and regularly reviewed. There are a lot of fire panels out there, I'm sure, Alan, that you come across that aren't compliant, haven't been updated or the like. So it's just making sure that these committees are regularly on top of it. And be placing notices in notice boards, reminding people not to keep these sorts of gas cylinders and things indoors. There's requirements there's limitations on what you can keep indoors by way of the gas cilinders, and that extends out into the balcony, how many areas you can have out on the balcony. So, there's certainly some policing. If you see, 3 or 4 gas bottles on a cylinder, then your committee, should be jumping up and down what's going on.
Yeah.
And even in storage areas like the back of garages and storage cages and that type of thing as well, it must be an issue too.
Absolutely. I mean, the areas need to be ventilated and well stored and make sure nothing's going to fall on them. Yep.
And Alan, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I think a lot of people get lapsed because they haven't had a fire before. But if you look at the statistics from the turnouts to building fires from the fire service, and then just extrapolate it from your own experience, because I can guarantee there was a fire in every capital city today in a building. Now some of them would be very small. They might be, your fry pan catches on fire and you put a wet tea towel over the top of it, or you put the lid on the fry pan and it goes out, or small things. There might be a small fire in a workshop. All of those things don't get reported to the fire brigade. But so there is a high proportion of fires that happen every day that are just on the cusp of going from not something insignificant to something significant, like this one did, where the fire got out of control. You've got gas bottles and all of a sudden you've got something that basically takes someone's life. So I think we can't be too cautious with making sure that we're not storing hazardous goods or an excess of potential fuel in our buildings. I don't think we can go far enough with going, let's take some of that stuff out and dispose of it, not rather than keep it.
Okay, so what would you class as dangerous goods?
So dangerous goods have a very specific, statutory definition of what they are, but I would broaden that to look at any sort of build-up of anything in your house. So if you've got a balcony where you're storing, for example, a load of, you might have had your furniture replaced, or you might have had a bed replaced, and all of a sudden you've got an excess build-up of furniture or mattresses and the like that you may be storing on a balcony until you get around to disposing them. Why they're not dangerous goods? They're full of foam, and foam is effectively petrol. So once that catches on light, that is actually a really big fuel source. So dangerous goods are very specific. So we're talking things like gas bottles and fuel, petrol and diesel. we're talking large quantities potentially of cooking oils and fats. Those are usually the ones that are dangerous goods, but there's a lot more things that can actually build up a fire risk inside your house.
I think we had a question a little while ago that came in, and it was about a resident being concerned about a pile of records in somebody's garage. They had lots and lots of paper records, and it was like boxes and boxes, and they were concerned about that being a fire risk as well.
Yeah, and it definitely can be a fire risk, but it depends upon how it's stored. You know, if it's neatly in archive boxes on shelves, then you know, then you go, oh, that's actually relatively well managed. But if it's just all piled in one corner of the shed, up against an electrical power point that's being used, or a power board that's stuck in behind it, then you know, that just exacerbates the risk. So yeah, you've got to be really conscious of what you're doing when you're combining, you know, electrical power boards or you know, something that can really start a fire very easily if it's covered in paper and other potentially flammable goods. Okay.
And Tony, did you have something you'd like to add as well?
I was just going to say, you know, what Alan was referring to before about the build-up of excess rubbish. You know, people dump a couch, they dump a mattress. That is a really easy thing that a committee or the on-site owners can keep an eye on, keep a track on, make sure the managers are doing their diligence to then therefore have it removed to again limit these risks. That's another aspect for sure.
Okay, because I was actually going to ask you, Tony, with regards, like if you were a lot owner that was either looking to store some items, if you had like 3 gas bottles and you needed to store them somewhere, what would the protocol or the process be there? And also if you're a lot owner in a building and you can see someone else storing items, like you were saying, if you've got excess furniture hanging around or bits and pieces in the storage area, what would happen, or what should you be doing to let the committee know?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The unit owner should be reaching out to the committee in turn reaching out to the manager, just to try and police it. So if there is a build-up, then that can be addressed. If it's rubbish, you know, and it's been dumped, that can be organised to be removed. If it's stored unnecessarily, then you know, the manager can take actions to try and have that tidied up, working in with the property managers or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And we've just actually had a comment come through, which you might be interested in. One of our viewers has just mentioned our essential services people made us clear out a lot of paint that was stored in our electrical cabinets. So that's probably another one that's a bit of a flag, a red flag.
Absolutely. And to that point, when I mentioned insurance earlier, you know, Alan was talking about commercial sites and the differences between commercial and residential. And, you know, more often than not, at least here in SA, a commercial site will also have an insurance audit. So somebody will come out and they'll go through and they'll say, well, that's got to go, that's got to go. You can't leave that there, which is something that unfortunately the residentials miss out on. So it's up to everybody else to police it.
So in South Australia, you're not having regular fire audits done on buildings?
I'll refer to Alan.
Yeah, we have, depending upon what the building is. So say it's a residential small, you know, walk-up apartments or walk-up units, then there would only be an inspection by a company like ours for the stuff in the common areas. And for some of the older building stock, there is actually no fire systems in place. So there's no regular maintenance being done on it from someone like us, and the councils, there's no regular sign off on those buildings because there's no fire systems in place. And as those buildings are older, if they were built now, they would have fire systems in place. So the council do have a review process that they go through to look at the older building stock to identify where there is a high risk and what needs to be updated for it. So that's the Community Fire Safety Committee that's led by the individual councils.
Okay.
And they certainly do impose on some of these older buildings if there is some issues that they do get updated. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Which is something your group should be budgeting for, by the way.
Yes, yeah. And so do you feel like committees are fairly well informed when it comes to this kind of issue, or are they a bit bury their head in the sand, or?
Look, I think it's like anything, there's a lot of issues out there that affect everybody, and committees are struggling to get across everything all at once. And depending on the property, you know, as Alan was saying, you know, if it's a smaller, older property, you know, Nan lives in Unit 5 and Grandpa in Unit 4, then you know, these people, if they're self-managed particularly, might be struggling to really keep track of what's going on, and really only interested in trying to keep the costs down, which you know, we all want, but we've got to make sure we're safe.
And do you find that too, Alan?
Yeah, and I think it's experience. So people that have experienced a fire in the past are much more diligent with it. It's not fire maintenance and fire risk. If you've never experienced a building fire in your life, you've never been exposed to it, you just think it's a waste of money and an expense that's not needed. And one of the reasons that you get that is because we have good, well-built buildings with fire systems in place, that we don't often see a fire that gets reported in a house or in a complex. And when there is a fire, it's very rarely does it actually result in a loss of life. So we're so insulated because it's actually, we've got safe buildings that we're living in now that people aren't fully aware of it like they would have been, you know, 50, 100 years ago.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add, or you think that just about covers it today?
I think we covered the fire stuff, but just really briefly, I just wanted to say we should, you know, not just from a unit perspective, but just in general, we need to really take stock of the storage of cylinders. You know, I mean, I know personally I've got a couple out the back, you know, for barbecues and whatnot, and just making sure people are looking after them. They're checking the valves, making sure they're stored properly, all of those sorts of things. You see a couple of times a year in the news where somebody's done something a little bit silly with one. I think we had one in Elizabeth earlier this year where somebody was trying to get the gas out of all of them with a pickaxe and, you know, explosion. So it's just, yeah, really we've got to try and educate all of us about gas cylinders, I think, as well, more than anything, because I'm not sure that there's a lot of education around that floating around, except for when something bad happens like this.
Yep.
Great information. All right, well, thank you so much. When the news story broke, I did actually send it over to Alan and Tony, and they've written an article, and the article will be appearing in our newsletter tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. And we will also embed this video into the page, and you can have a quick view of the video because we have expanded on some of the points. All right, thank you so much, Alan and Tony. It was great for you to jump on so quickly and join me in this session, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alan.